On the night of February 1st, 1959, 9 experienced hikers tore through their tent from the inside and fled barefoot into the frozen Siberian wilderness. The temperature was negative 30 degrees Celsius. Some were barely clothed. They ran toward certain death. When rescuers found their bodies weeks later, the scene defied all logic. Fractured skulls with no external wounds, missing eyes and tongues, clothing contaminated with radiation, a camera with photographs that captured something in the darkness. This is the Dyatlov Pass Incident, one of the most documented yet unexplained tragedies in modern history. The Soviet government sealed the case files for decades. And after 66 years of investigation, expert analysis, and scientific research, we still don't know what happened on that mountain. But we know something did. In January 1959, 10 young Soviet adventurers assembled in Sverdlovsk, now known as Yekaterinburg. They were not amateurs. They were not weekend hikers testing their luck against nature. This was an elite hiking group, assembled specifically for a challenging winter expedition that would earn them the highest certification in Soviet mountaineering, Grade 3. To understand the mystery of what happened, you must first understand who these people were. The group leader was Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old radio engineering student with extensive hiking experience. Dyatlov was known for his meticulous planning and calm demeanor under pressure. His friends described him as the kind of person who checked his equipment 3 times before any expedition. He had led multiple successful treks through the Ural Mountains and was considered one of the most promising young outdoorsmen in the region. This was not a reckless adventurer. This was a careful, experienced leader. Among the group were Zinaida Kolmogorova, a 22-year-old economics student and experienced hiker who had completed multiple challenging expeditions. Rustam Slobodin, also 23, was known for his guitar playing and storytelling around campfires. He was the group's morale keeper, the one who kept spirits high during difficult moments. There were 2 members named Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko, both in their 20s, both engineering students with years of hiking experience between them. They had been friends since childhood and were inseparable on expeditions. Lyudmila Dubinina was a 20-year-old economics student who kept a detailed expedition diary. Her entries were meticulous, recording weather conditions, distances traveled, and observations about the landscape. That diary would later become crucial evidence. Alexander Kolvatov was a physics student, quiet but highly intelligent. Nikolai Thiboksbrignoles, whose French surname reflected Russia's complex history, was one of the strongest hikers in the group. And Semyon Zolotaryov, at 37 the oldest member, was a veteran of World War II who had joined the group at the last moment, replacing another hiker who had dropped out. Zolotaryov's presence was slightly unusual. He was older, more weathered, and according to some accounts, more secretive about his past. Some researchers have focused on him as potentially significant to what happened, though nothing has ever been proven. The 10th member was Yuri Yudin. Remember his name. His decision in the coming days would save his life. Their planned route was ambitious, but entirely achievable for hikers of their caliber. They would travel north through the Ural Mountains to Otorten, a mountain whose name translates from the indigenous Mansi language as "don't go there." The round trip would cover approximately 300 kilometers through some of the most remote wilderness in the Soviet Union. The trek would take approximately 3 weeks. They prepared extensively. They carried proper winter gear, including warm clothing, sleeping bags rated for extreme cold, food supplies for 3 weeks plus emergency rations, camping equipment, tools, and multiple cameras to document their achievement. Each member carried a backpack weighing approximately 30 kilograms. On January 23, 1959, they boarded a train heading northeast from Sverdlovsk. They were excited, well-prepared, and confident. They joked and sang songs. One photograph from the train shows them smiling at the camera, arms around each other, unaware they were capturing their final happy moments together. On January 25th, they arrived at Ivdel, a small town, and then traveled to Vizhai, the last inhabited settlement before the wilderness. From here, there would be no more villages, no more people, no more civilization, just forest, mountains, and snow. The local Mansi people, indigenous to the region, reportedly warned them about the area they were heading toward. The warnings, according to some accounts, were specific. Certain mountains were considered sacred or dangerous. The name Atorten itself meant "don't go there" in the Mansi language. But experienced Soviet hikers, trained in materialist thinking and scientific reasoning, did not turn back because of local superstitions. They were educated young people representing the future of the Soviet Union. Folk warnings about cursed mountains were not taken seriously. They entered the wilderness on January 27th. 3 days into the expedition, something unexpected happened. Yuri Yudin became ill. The symptoms were severe enough that continuing would be dangerous, possibly life-threatening if they worsened in the remote wilderness. On January 28th, the group made the difficult decision that Yudin would turn back while the others continued. The decision saved his life. Yudin was the last person outside the group to see his 9 friends alive. Decades later, he would describe that final parting in interviews, his voice still heavy with survivor's guilt. He watched them disappear into the snow, waving goodbye. They were cheerful, well-supplied, and confident. Nothing seemed wrong. Nothing seemed dangerous. He turned back toward civilization. They continued north. The group maintained their schedule. Lyudmila Dubinina's diary entries continued, documenting their progress. On January 31st, they reached the edge of the highland area. They cached some supplies and equipment in the forest to lighten their loads for the final push to Ator. This was standard practice. On February 1st, they began climbing the pass between 2 mountains. Weather was deteriorating. Snow was falling. Visibility was decreasing. At some point that day, they made a decision that would later be questioned. Instead of descending to the forest to set up camp in a protected area, they pitched their tent on the exposed slope of the mountain. This was unusual. Everything in their training would have told them to seek shelter in the tree line, but the evidence shows they deliberately camped on that slope. Why? Some researchers believe they wanted to practice setting up camp in difficult conditions. Others think they were trying to save time, planning to complete the pass crossing the next morning. Still others believe they may have been too exhausted to continue down to the forest. Whatever the reason, they set up their tent on the exposed mountainside. And as night fell on February 1st, 1959, something happened. The group had agreed to send a telegram to their sports club when they reached the village of Vizhai on their return journey. The expected date was February 12th. No one was particularly concerned when the 12th passed without word. Delays were common in winter expeditions. Weather could trap groups for days. Equipment could break. Routes might need to be changed. A few days' delay meant nothing. But when February 15th arrived with still no communication, some families began to express worry. By February 20th, when no word had arrived and the group was now more than a week overdue, real concern set in. On February 22nd, search and rescue operations officially began. The first search teams included volunteer students and outdoor enthusiasts who knew Dyatlov personally and respected his skills. They were joined by the military, police officers, and local Mansi hunters who knew the terrain intimately. Resources were mobilized quickly. Helicopters were deployed. Tracking dogs were brought in. Professional search and rescue teams arrived from across the region. This was not a token effort. The Soviet system, whatever its faults, took care of its people in situations like this. Dozens of searchers combed the wilderness. The search area was vast, the weather conditions brutal, visibility often near zero. But these were experienced searchers. They understood winter conditions. They understood how to track groups through wilderness. If there were bodies to find, they would find them. The search focused on the planned route between the last confirmed location and Ural Mountain. Days passed. Helicopter pilots flew endless grids over the white landscape. Ground teams probed snowdrifts and examined every unusual formation. On February 26th, 5 days into the search, they discovered the abandoned campsite. What they found made no sense. The tent was located on the slope of a mountain, an area that would later be named Dyatlov Pass in honor of the group leader. It was at an elevation of approximately 1,100 meters on an exposed, windswept slope. The tent was still partially standing, though one side had collapsed under accumulated snow, but it had not been destroyed. It was not buried. It was simply sitting there, abandoned. As searchers approached and began to carefully examine the scene, what they discovered became increasingly bizarre. The tent had been cut open from the inside. Long, deliberate slashes through the canvas, not torn by wind, not damaged by falling or animal attack, cut with knives by the people inside the tent. At least 8 cuts were identified, some over a meter long. Someone had taken a knife or multiple knives and slashed through their only shelter from the elements. And then they had fled through these cuts into the night. Inside the tent, searchers found most of the group's supplies still in place. Food, warm clothing, boots, everything needed for survival was still there, abandoned. Some items were arranged as though the occupants had been preparing for sleep. Sleeping bags were laid out. Personal items were in their expected places. But the people were gone. In the snow leading away from the tent, searchers found footprints. Clear impressions in the snow showing the group had left together, but the nature of these footprints was deeply strange. Some were from bare feet, naked footprints in snow at -30 degrees Celsius. Others showed only socks. A few showed a single boot, as though someone had grabbed only one boot before fleeing. The prints were measured, photographed, documented with meticulous care. They showed the group had walked, not run initially, in a relatively orderly single-file line toward the tree line approximately 1,500 meters downslope to the northeast. Not panic sprinting, walking in formation. They walked away from their shelter, their supplies, their survival equipment into deadly cold, barefoot, barely clothed, in an organized group. The footprints could be followed for several hundred meters before wind and snow obscured them, but the direction was absolutely clear. They were heading toward the forest edge below. Experienced search and rescue personnel tried to make sense of this. What could possibly make 9 experienced hikers, in the middle of the night, cut their way out of their tent and walk nearly 1.5 miles into darkness wearing completely inadequate clothing? What threat could be so immediate, so terrifying, that freezing to death became the preferable option? The first bodies were found on February 27th at the forest edge, beneath a large cedar tree approximately 1,500 meters from the tent. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko, the 2 childhood friends, were found lying side by side in the snow beneath the cedar's branches. They were shoeless, wearing only their underwear. Their hands and fingers showed evidence they had tried desperately to climb the cedar tree. Broken branches up to 5 meters high indicated someone had climbed up, possibly trying to see back toward the tent or looking for something in the darkness. A fire had been built at the base of the tree. The remains were still visible, small branches and twigs partially burned. Someone had attempted to create warmth to survive, to fight against the killing cold. But both men had died of hypothermia. Their bodies were frozen solid. The discovery of these 2 bodies confirmed the worst fears, but it also raised immediate questions. Why had they stopped here? Why hadn't they tried to return to the tent once they had distance from whatever threat they perceived? Why build a fire at the forest edge rather than seeking better shelter deeper in the trees? The search intensified. If 2 bodies were here, the others must be nearby. 300 meters back along the path toward the tent, searchers found 3 more bodies over the following days. Igor Dyatlov, the group leader, was found on March 5th. He was frozen in a position that suggested he had been trying to return to the tent. He was found face up in the snow, one hand grasping a small birch tree branch as though he had been pulling himself forward. Zinaida Kolmogorova was discovered 330 meters from the cedar, also positioned as though returning toward the tent. She was lying face down, her hands beneath her. Rustam Slobodin was found between Dyatlov and Kolmogorova, 480 meters from the cedar tree. All 3 had died of hypothermia. All 3 were inadequately dressed. But here's what was particularly strange and tragic. They had survived longer than the 2 Urals under the cedar. Their bodies were found progressively closer to the tent, as though after the initial panic had passed, they had attempted to return for supplies, for shelter, for survival. What stopped them? Why did they collapse and die before reaching the tent that was now visible on the slope above? The autopsies were performed by local medical examiners. All 3 showed signs of hypothermia as cause of death. Slobodin had a small skull fracture, but the medical examiner noted it was not severe enough to be immediately fatal or even incapacitating. These could have been from falls in the darkness on hard-packed snow and ice. 5 bodies recovered, 4 still missing. The search continued through March and into April as the snow slowly melted. The remaining 4 had to be somewhere. The snow was deep, in places over 4 meters deep. Probes were pushed into snowdrifts along the entire route. The helicopters made endless passes over the area. Where were the others? On May 4th, nearly 3 months after the incident and more than 2 months after the search began, the remaining 4 bodies were discovered. They were found in a ravine about 75 meters from the cedar tree, buried under 4 meters of compacted snow in a small stream bed. These bodies were different from the first 5, very different. Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolvatov, Nikolai Thiboksbrignoles, and Semyon Zolotaryov were found together in the ravine. The snow depth and location suggested they had survived the initial flight from the tent, had perhaps even tried to create a survival shelter. There was evidence they had attempted to dig into the snow or build a den, which was actually a legitimate survival technique for creating an insulated shelter. Some of them were wearing clothing that had belonged to the other victims, suggesting they had returned to the bodies under the cedar tree and removed clothing from their dead friends to add layers against the cold. This was logical survival behavior, however grim. But unlike the first 5 who had died of hypothermia with relatively minor injuries, these 4 showed massive internal trauma that would change everything about the investigation. The autopsies were performed by Boris Vozrozhdeny, an experienced senior medical examiner. His reports would become some of the most analyzed and debated documents in the entire case. Lyudmila Dubinina's body showed catastrophic injuries. Her chest had been crushed with extreme force. Multiple ribs were fractured bilaterally, meaning both sides of her ribcage. The force had been so severe that it had caused massive internal hemorrhaging. But here's what made it impossible to explain. There were no external wounds, no bruising on the skin, no cuts, no abrasions. The skin was intact. The bones were shattered beneath undamaged skin. More disturbing still, Dubinina's tongue, eyes, and part of her facial tissue were missing. The medical examiner noted these were absent when the body was found, with the wounds appearing to have occurred before death, not removed by animal scavengers after death. The mechanism of this injury was never satisfactorily explained. Nikolai Thiboksbrignoles had major skull damage. His temporal bone was fractured with massive force. Again, no external wound, no scalp damage, just a crushed skull beneath intact skin. Alexander Zolotaryov's injuries were similar to Dubinina's. Severe chest fractures, multiple broken ribs, massive internal trauma, no external injuries. Dr. Vozrozhdeny wrote something in his official report that has been quoted in every analysis of this case since. The force required to cause these injuries was comparable to the force of a car crash. He specifically noted there were no external wounds corresponding to the internal trauma. The bones were broken by massive force applied somehow without damaging the surface of the body. In his professional opinion, these injuries could not have been caused by another human being. No human could generate this level of force without leaving marks, bruises, or external trauma. He also ruled out animal attack for the same reason. So what caused injuries comparable to a car crash, breaking bones and crushing organs, without leaving a single mark on the skin? There's one more detail that makes this even stranger. When the clothing from these four bodies was later tested, some items showed elevated levels of radioactive contamination. Not extremely high, but measurably above normal background radiation levels. The contamination was not uniform across all clothing, suggesting it was not environmental. The Soviet investigation officially concluded in May 1959. After 3 months of searching, dozens of investigators, military involvement, and extensive analysis, the official determination was listed as death caused by a compelling natural force. Not an avalanche, not an animal attack, not human action, a compelling natural force. No specifics were provided, no explanation was offered. The case files were sealed and classified. The area around Dyatlov Pass was closed to hikers and adventurers for the next 3 years. No official reason was given for the closure. No one was blamed, no one was charged, no criminal investigation followed. And for decades, that was where the official story ended. Except it didn't end, it couldn't end, because none of it made sense. The Dyatlov Pass Incident refused to stay buried. In the 66 years since that night, the Dyatlov Pass Incident has become one of the most analyzed mysterious deaths in modern history. Investigators, scientists, journalists, documentary filmmakers, and thousands of amateur researchers have proposed literally dozens of theories. Some are scientifically grounded, some are speculative, some are bizarre. Let's examine the major theories and why each one fails to explain everything. The avalanche theory is the most recent official explanation. In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the case after decades and concluded a small avalanche or snow slab collapse caused the hikers to panic and flee the tent. In 2021, scientists from Switzerland published research in a peer-reviewed journal suggesting a delayed slab avalanche could potentially explain both the tent damage and the internal injuries. The theory suggests a small avalanche struck the tent, injuring some members and causing panic. The group evacuated and walked to the forest to regroup. The internal injuries without external wounds could theoretically be explained by the type of blunt force trauma an avalanche creates. But there are significant problems with this theory. First, experienced avalanche investigators who visited the site noted the slope angle was approximately 23 degrees, which is generally considered too shallow for typical avalanche conditions. Avalanches typically require slopes of 30 to 45 degrees. Second, the tent was still standing, partially intact, not buried under snow. Avalanche victims are typically buried or swept away. Third, avalanche victims almost always show external trauma, crushed bodies, broken limbs with corresponding external injuries. The pattern here was opposite, severe internal injuries with no external damage. Fourth, and perhaps most critically, if an avalanche had struck and then stopped, why didn't the hikers return to the tent once they realized there was no continuing danger? They had walked 1,500 meters away. They had built a fire. Some tried to return. They had time to assess the situation. Why not retrieve supplies, clothing, and shelter once the immediate danger had passed? The infrasound theory proposes that specific wind conditions created low-frequency sound waves that induced panic, fear, and irrational behavior in the hikers. Infrasound is sound below 20 Hz, below the range of human hearing. Research has shown that certain infrasound frequencies can cause anxiety, feelings of dread, disorientation, and even hallucinations. The mountain terrain, with its specific shapes and wind patterns, could theoretically have created natural resonance chambers that generated intense infrasound. This would explain the sudden panic, the irrational decision to flee the tent, and the coordinated but confused behavior. But it doesn't explain the physical injuries. Infrasound doesn't break bones, it doesn't crush chests, it doesn't remove eyes and tongues. The military test theory suggests the hikers accidentally witnessed or were caught in a secret Soviet military test, possibly involving parachute mines, experimental missiles, or other weapons. Evidence supporting this includes the radiation detected on some clothing. The area was relatively close to known military testing ranges. Multiple witnesses in villages up to 50 kilometers away reported seeing orange spheres or unusual lights in the sky around the time of the incident. These reports were documented in the official investigation, but never explained. Some versions of this theory suggest the hikers witnessed something they shouldn't have and were killed to maintain secrecy. Others suggest they were accidentally injured by weapons tests, and the Soviet government covered it up to avoid embarrassment during the Cold War. The problem with this theory is the lack of any evidence of military presence at the scene. No shell casings, no chemical residue, no equipment, no tracks other than the hikers' own footprints. The paradoxical undressing theory explains one aspect: why victims removed clothing. In the final stages of hypothermia, victims often feel extremely hot due to a malfunction in the body's temperature regulation. This causes them to remove clothing, a phenomenon called paradoxical undressing. This is medically documented and well understood. This explains the state of undress of the victims found under the cedar. But it doesn't explain why they left the tent initially, or the catastrophic internal injuries on 4 of the bodies. The katabatic wind theory suggests powerful downslope winds created by cold air flowing down the mountain could have damaged the tent and created conditions that forced evacuation. But experienced mountaineers know how to handle wind. You don't abandon your shelter because of wind. You secure it and wait it out. Among the evidence recovered were multiple cameras carried by group members. Most contained normal expedition photos, campfires, smiling faces, mountain scenery, the usual documentation of a hiking trip. But one camera, recovered from Semyon Zolotaryov's body, contained something unusual. The film was developed carefully. Most frames showed normal images, but frame number 34, one of the last images on the roll, shows something that has been debated for decades. The image is unclear, either overexposed, damaged, or deliberately obscured. Different analysts see different things in this frame. Some claim it shows a humanoid figure. Others see an unusual light source. Many see nothing but accidental light exposure or film damage. The original negative has been examined multiple times by photo experts. Some claim they can see a distinct shape. Others say it's pareidolia, the human tendency to see patterns in random data. What's interesting is that this photograph was taken, presumably, sometime before or during the events that led to their deaths. What was Zolotaryov photographing? We may never know for certain. Here's what we know with absolute certainty, documented in photographs, autopsy reports, and official investigation records. 9 experienced hikers made a decision that night. They cut through their tent from the inside rather than use the entrance. They walked nearly a mile and a half in sub-zero temperatures wearing inadequate clothing. They tried to survive, building a fire, climbing a tree, attempting to return to the tent. 4 of them sustained massive internal trauma that no human could inflict, and no normal animal attack could explain. Something happened on that mountain, something that made survival instinct override rational thought, something that made death by freezing in the wilderness preferable to staying in that tent. The question that has haunted investigators for 66 years remains. What? In 2019, when Russian authorities reopened the case after decades of it being officially closed, they examined 75 different theories. They consulted experts in avalanche dynamics, forensic pathology, military history, and atmospheric physics. They settled on avalanche as the official explanation. But even the scientists who published the peer-reviewed avalanche research acknowledged their model doesn't answer everything. It provides a possible explanation for some aspects of the incident, but significant questions remain unaddressed. The truth is, we may never know with certainty what happened on that mountain on the night of February 1st, 1959. Yuri Yudin, the 10th hiker who turned back due to illness, spent the rest of his life haunted by the loss of his friends. He participated in numerous investigations, gave countless interviews, joined multiple expeditions back to the pass, and examined every theory and piece of evidence. In interviews before his death in 2013, he stated he believed his friends had encountered something unexpected, something that caused overwhelming panic, but he never claimed to know what that something was. He said the explanation, whatever it might be, died with his 9 friends in the snow. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains officially unexplained despite multiple investigations. The case files, once sealed and classified, are now public and available for researchers to examine. New theories emerge regularly as people analyze the evidence through new lenses. The pass itself has become a strange kind of pilgrimage site. Hikers, investigators, and curious visitors regularly trek to the location. Memorial plaques mark the spots where bodies were found. Some visitors report unusual feelings or experiences, though these are impossible to verify. The mountain keeps its secrets. 9 experienced hikers died on that slope in February 1959. The evidence is documented, photographed, preserved in official records. The autopsies are public documents. The investigation files are available for anyone to read. And yet, after thousands of hours of analysis, after decades of scientific research, after countless expeditions to the site, after multiple official investigations, we still don't know what they were running from. Was it a natural phenomenon we don't yet understand? Some combination of weather, terrain, and atmospheric conditions that created a perfect storm of deadly circumstances? Was it a military accident, covered up by a secretive Soviet government during the height of Cold War paranoia? Was it something else entirely, something we haven't considered, something outside our current understanding? The Dyatlov Pass incident reminds us that even in our modern age, even with all our science and technology, even with all our ability to analyze and investigate, some mysteries remain unsolved. They're not solved, they're only remembered. 9 people climbed a mountain in 1959. Something happened in the darkness, and whatever it was terrifying enough that death by freezing became the better option. The evidence is undeniable. The explanation is not. This has been Mysterious Archive Files. Some mysteries are never solved. They're only remembered. And some questions remain unanswered in the snow.